Hello and welcome to another YouTube video, first one in a while. It's the start of a new series, probably. The idea of the new series is going to be looking at people's favourite albums and getting guests in to talk about, expert guests in to talk about albums they personally would say are 10 out of 10s. It's going to be talking about what could be the perfect album. And here's the first guest on the first episode. We have Daisy from neutralmilkmemes fame. So what album are you going to be talking about today?
I'm going to be talking about 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge by My Chemical Romance.
So, let's just get started, really.
Yeah.
So, do you want to tell us a bit of the context around it, when it was released, etc.?
Well, it was released in 2004, and it was the second album from My Chemical Romance, and, the second studio album. And yeah, I'd say it's my favourite album to date, really, because it's got a lot of significance to me personally, and yeah, I'd consider it, for me, a perfect album.
Nice, perfect album. Strong start.
Yeah.
And what kind of an effect did you have on, do you think it had on the band as a whole, their sound, their perception, etc.?
Well, a lot of people say it was their first album to kind of have a resounding impact because they released, beforehand they released an album called I Brought You My Bullets, You Brought Me My Love in 2002, and that was their debut. And this album has a much cleaner sound and is a lot better produced than their first album, so that brought a lot of fame to the band, really. And because, their first album was relatively successful, but this one was the kind of one that a lot of people would argue ultimately defined the band.
As defining the band, they brought kind of emo. Obviously, people are going to be like, oh, My Chemical Romance isn't emo, it's alternative rock. But that kind of edgier sound to rock.
I'd say that a lot of people would consider them emo.
It's something you always get people complaining about.
There's always the whole debate with American football and Rites of Spring. But I'd say emo. It's kind of a thing that a lot of people argue about. But I'd consider them somewhat emo. But yeah.
Yeah, emo is quite a broad thing, like almost all genres.
Exactly.
If you compare it to, say, rock, rock is so varied.
It's
why
so
can't
vague
emo
as
be
well.
varied?
Completely.
So do you want to kind of run through the kind of sound of the album, the track list, the themes, etc.,
sure.
So people know what it's about?
So the opener to the album, Helena, is 3 minutes long, and that is what a lot of people would say the main song off the album, because it's very kind of defining for the tone of the album, and it's very kind of quite angsty, quite kind of very kind of pop punky, but not in a pretentious way, I'd say. And yeah, it's kind of uplifting as well, which is also a theme in the album. It's got dark themes, but it's ultimately quite uplifting, I'd argue. Yeah.
Yeah, and is it one of those tracks that you can go back to again and again?
Oh yeah,
and again?
Absolutely.
Like a real big hit.
Yeah, it's a lot of people would say it's a classic. This album's on a lot of charts like Enemy, for classic, well, not emo albums, but that type of genre. And yeah, it's a lot of people consider it a very kind of era-defining album.
Nice. Yeah, so era-defining is probably a good word to use about it. It was, as this kind of wave of alternative rock was kind of coming through.
Yeah. It's not strictly emo revival, because that's more kind of other bands like American football and stuff like that. But it basically, this album was one of the ones, along with a few other albums of that time, that basically kind of brought emo type music to the mainstream as well, because this album was it wasn't immediately commercially successful, but it became platinum after less than a year, and it's sold over 1 million copies in the US, so I think it's done quite well, basically. And it
has good numbers.
Yeah, definitely, it's not bad.
Yeah, so I think introducing that style to a whole new bunch of people is probably one of the main achievements of the album, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, because it's relatively accessible. Like, I think a lot of people can enjoy this album. It's not like Mersbo or anything like that. That kind of it's not a particularly acquired taste. Like, I'd say most people can listen to it and at least enjoy it to some degree.
So would you, as a kind of like side note, would you recommend if people wanted to get into MCR to start here? And would you say
Yeah,
it's a good like starting point?
I'd say a lot of people start with the Black Parade because that is their most kind of that's really their biggest album. But I'd say this is my favourite from their discography, and I'd say especially if you're trying to get into specifically kind of Misfits type of music, like Misfits, and kind of there's elements of like punk rock and stuff as well. And I'd say if you're more into that kind of scene, this is definitely the album for you. And yeah, it's got like I'm Not Okay is another song off it that's very kind of widely known as one of the most famous My Chemical Romance ones. And and another aspect of this album that's very kind of talked about is the music videos, because it had some very iconic ones, like I'm pretty sure it's Helena, and it's very kind of, a lot of people at the time period when it came out, a lot of people would see that and be like, oh yeah, it's My Chemical Romance. Like it was very kind of, they were very talked about.
Yeah, as a kind of like breakthrough album, I think it definitely did that job well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as well as being a great like entry point into emo and alternative rock music of the time, it also serves quite well as a concept album.
Oh
Would
yeah.
you be able to go into a bit more detail about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one that's quite widely discussed because it is a concept album, but the concept itself is kind of quite blurry. Like a lot of people talk about it as, well, it talks about lovers and a kind of Romeo and Juliet type scenario. However, a lot of people kind of discuss it because there's a lot of death themes and a lot of themes of kind of, yeah, like loss and stuff. But the actual kind of, it's one that's kind of controversial, not controversial, but it's kind of widely discussed in that people can't quite decide what it's about because a lot of people have different ideas. But I think the kind of widely accepted one is that it's about lovers being parted through death and other things like that, basically.
So that kind of exploring those themes in like a more general sense throughout the whole album.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I mean, it's not that long either. It's
fair. How long is the runtime? Approximately?
Well, it's 39 minutes and 36 seconds, so it's not ridiculously long. It's kind of quite a good length.
No, that is a good length. Albums, obviously, lots of albums come in different like shapes and sizes, and you can get short ones and long ones. But 39 is, or sub 1 hour. For like rock albums, I found always kind of works best because they can get a bit bloated.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've got a lot of, I mean, well, like in the Court of the Crimson King, like very long and things like that. And I mean, they're good as well, but I think
prog can like fill that.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think it's kind of one of those things. It kind of really depends on the sort of tone of the album itself. Like I think as an artist, you've got to judge how long it should be based on the kind of concepts and tone of the album, really.
Nice, yeah. I definitely agree with that. Yeah, so what does it, because obviously you said to you it's a kind of like perfect album, and so would you say it just being so like consistently good, having like a consistent, what makes it so amazing?
I consider it very consistent. Like there isn't a single track on it that I don't like, and I like them all for very kind of different reasons. Like they've all got a lot in common because it's a very kind of succinct album with similar themes throughout. But I'd say the thing that kind of really makes it stand out to me is the kind of how some songs are just, I find them all like very powerful, but it's in different ways. Like you've got Helena, which is the opener. It's very kind of brash. It's very like open and very brash and very kind of, like it's a good establisher. Whereas you've got Cemetery Drive later on, which is kind of fast paced but with a slightly more melancholic tone, and The Ghost of You, which is quite a sad one, and it varies throughout, which I like a lot. Like, it's not you don't get bored listening to it, basically.
Yeah, no, variety in an album is definitely good, and variety is something I talk about a fair bit in my reviews. If I like something, variety, but like sticking to a theme while providing variety in that theme is definitely a sign of a great album.
Yeah, definitely, I completely agree with that.
To finish off, quite often perfect albums have like a kind of more of a meaning to the person that like rates them as perfect, because you can't really like classify anything as perfect, like scientifically perfect. So what would you say it like means to you? How did you discover it? And yeah.
I mean, I've been very into My Chemical Romance since I was like a kid, really. Like, they were one of the bands that ultimately got me into music, and I'd say this album had a large part in that, because I mean, yeah, it's kind of what like widely accepted as an album for a lot of people, that is kind of, it gets people through things, and it's one of those types of albums. And for me, yeah, I just, it was definitely one of the ones that properly got me into music and got me where I am, like, musically, like with the music that I like today. Like, it was definitely one of the greatest influences for me in the music I enjoy. And yeah, basically, yeah. And I mean, it's always been kind of, yeah, like quite personal to me, because I don't know, I've never got bored of it, really. Like, I've liked it the whole time, really. It's not been one of those things that I'll listen to and I'll be like, actually, I don't like this much. Like, I've never really said, oh, I actually don't really like this. It's always been something that I've kind of gone back to and enjoyed.
Yeah, like something that never really gets like old or tired.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so I'd say that's a pretty convincing argument for it, and hopefully a lot more people will go and check it out now if you haven't already.
I urge you to.
Yeah, got anything more to say about it, really?
No, I think that's kind of, we covered most of it. Thank you for having me on your channel.
On the show, yeah.
Yeah, Not Just Folk Show. Thank you.
Nice. And yeah, I think we might hopefully do this as a bit of a series, getting more people on. And I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought of the video down below. Let me know what you think of the album. Hopefully you like it. If you don't, after all that, that'll be a bit of a shame.
If you don't,
but yeah,
like, why?
There's going to be some fighting.
Like, I'd like to know.
But yeah, so yeah, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.